I've heard people say that layer 2 tokens are quote unquote worthless governance tokens. Worthless governance tokens. Okay, there's some sort of maybe like call on what's in the treasury, sort of, but like we've seen the futility of governance, and can't the core team kind of take it away? And they're not even, they don't even get sequencer revenues necessarily. It's all very murky. Jordi, what's your reaction to that statement that layer 2 tokens are nothing but worthless governance tokens?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a case by case situation. There's multiple categories of layer 2, like things like OP, ARB, ZK Sync. They're ultimately trying to build an ecosystem that will be attracting other layer 2s and kind of build these like super chains. And, you have a shared sequencers, or what Polygon's trying to do. Like, there's people trying to build this infrastructure layer, like a middle layer above Ethereum, and build before like you get to like the application layer where people are deploying directly. And some will win that game, and that will be a huge game. And I understand that there's like a premium for those who seem to be doing really well. Obviously, like OP has a head start in the sense of it's very Ethereum aligned, and it's like the default. Like if you want neutrality, if you're base or something like that, you just kind of go with OP. Mantle is kind of looking at OP as like this neutral layer as well. And maybe there's better technology if you go to the ZK path. I mean, there's like teams that are potentially going to be able to attract layer 2s in their ecosystem over there that might have, much, better user experience, right? With like better finality, bridging out is a lot faster, all this kind of stuff. So that's one category. And then there's like the category that I've been working on, I guess, personally, which is just trying to actually build product that people are actually using. And like, I'm not kind of, so fussed with middle layers and trying to get other people to build stuff. I'm just looking at like the end consumer and what do they want to use? What financial products do they want to use? Can I give them better yield than anywhere else? And like, we're seeing that applications can be very valuable. They can get, even on the gaming side, this is kind of a little bit crazy. Like, I don't know if you guys have talked to any gaming teams that are raising money, but they're just getting bid up by like, Mutables giving them X million and they're getting 5 million, and it's just crazy. And actually, I don't mind it because it kind of shows that to be relevant, these ecosystems do need to attract like viral, use cases. And it could just be culture. It could be like NFT collections. It could be something, culture based. I think culture is extremely understood how important it is. I mean, you talked about, Cardano, stuff like that. That's probably like a culture built around, maybe one person or, one concept, and it kind of, and it is valuable. So I have been thinking a lot about culture, and I think culture will capture a lot of value. And the thing I love about Ethereum as an asset, and as we talked about last time, where I've been so bullish, is more like the cultural community aspect rather than, is it like necessarily earning so much in burnt fees or something?
Okay, so Jordi, you've described a couple approaches chains are taking. Some are, trying to become platforms. Let's call them platform type chains, right? Others are trying to focus on the apps and actually the consumer side of it. Others are trying to really develop some sort of culture, some sort of mimetic relevance, let's say. But none of that still answers the question as to whether the underlying token is value. Like, is the token a claim on all of those things? We seem somewhat confused about that. We're not even sure that Uniswap, the Uni token, is sort of a claim on the success, the overall success of Uniswap at this phase in time. I'm not sure if we should be thinking of these as network equities, or are these still just like worthless governance tokens? Talk to me about that.
I'll give you an inside like story on this. In a bear market, everyone's thinking about like cash flow and showing like, a good PE ratio. And in a bull market, it just all goes out the window. It goes about like getting pension, getting TVL, unfortunately. And
Okay.
then, in the bear market, it'll go back to that. But you look at something like Lido, and like the revenue from Lido is not that high, even though it's by far the largest TVL in all of crypto, right? It's like, as an, if you look at the DeFi Llama charts, it's kind of way off there. But the actual revenue is not that high. And when I look at these things, I'm more thinking about like, it's not just the direct revenue from something like, 5% of the 3% or whatever, this kind of thing. It's more like, can you build other things to capture the ecosystem value that you have? Like, musicians don't make much money on streaming, but they go and they do a tour and they make like infinite money, doing live shows. And with these like layer 2 tokens, potentially, like with Mantle, for example, does it just have to be the sequencer fees? Like, we can do profit sharing agreements with like the DEX that we choose. Like we choose a perp DEX that we want to like fully back, and then we get a profit share from that. That could be like a lot of money as well. And you can expand that into like other things in the ecosystem. So you have to kind of start thinking, what else can I do with, the environment that I'm building, not just like sequencer fees.
What would you say to this, Mike? I'm curious your take on this. Like, if I'm buying ARB or if I'm buying OP, am I receiving a claim of that network success, or is this a bit more distant from an actual claim on the upside of this network?
I'm gonna take the opinion that eventually these L2s will find a way to extract value from the apps that get built on their ecosystem. And I think I wouldn't actually be wildly concerned with that. Like you can even look at Optimism and Arbitrum, and they have two very different ways of thinking about extracting that value. There's a really great post, I think, from either Ed or Steven on the Arbitrum side of things that use the theme park analogy to try to describe how they do it. And basically, it's like Coney Island versus Disneyland. And on the Optimism side with the super chain, it's the Coney Island model where it's basically free, but to actually get into the theme park, but then to actually do all the rides that you'd want to do. If you want to be a part of the super chain, then you have to pay some sort of fee. And in Disney, it's the exact opposite. You have to pay $5,000 or whatever it is up front, but then once you get in, everything is free. And that's very similar to the licensing model that Arbitrum has, where you have to pay a bunch, but then everything's kind of free after that. And it's sort of the opposite on Optimism. And I'm not actually wildly concerned. I think there'll be different models that these L2s find ways to extract value from their bundle. And I actually think it's probably a decent bet that if you buy the token, it does end up being an index for the value that gets created there.
Do you agree with that, Anthony? Yeah. Do you think that it's basically a given that if you buy the token, you're buying upside in the network?
I don't know if it's a given, but I think it's a good bet. I think it's a solid bet, basically.
I think index, I guess calling it an index is kind of similar to calling it a Schelling point, right? Like indexes are normally used as Schelling points for various things. I mean, it's just easy for people to think about. And I guess one thing you said before, Ryan, about relative valuations, that's actually incredibly important within crypto. That is like the main thing that people value things against, like each other, right? Like, because it's an easy kind of thing to do. It's like, okay, well, if you have a competing L1 and you're competing with Ethereum, well, of course you're going to look at ETH and be like, okay, well, ETH's worth $300 billion. We're worth $10 billion. Oh, look, we can be worth $300 billion too, because we're a platform just like Ethereum, right? And that happens all the time, not just with layer ones, not just with layer twos, but apps, everything. That is the thing that drives a lot of these narratives, is those relative valuations. Now, of course, as we've been saying, like, bull market, all the rules of the game go out of the window, right? Like you got so much demand coming in, right? It doesn't actually matter. And then you try to reason about this and you can't, because it makes no sense over that kind of, I guess, 6 to 12 month bulk of the bull market period where things are just going nuts. And that's why I say that I think a lot of these things are definitely overvalued based on my kind of thinking cap on. But if I take my thinking cap off, then I'm just like, well, what do I know, right? Like everyone's bidding up these things for various different reasons. I don't know anything. And that's why I say, like, short term, yeah, sure, you can do really well buying these things that I think aren't going to be good long term. But yeah, long term, I mean, I've done this myself over the long term. I've held some things, like I held something from 2017 to like 2019 or something, and I got like destroyed on it, right? But I did really well in 2017. But like 2 years later, I was just completely wrecked on it. I think the same thing is definitely going to play out here, but I do think there's something to be said about like the less overhead for people to just buy these things as broad exposure to an ecosystem, right? Because like a lot of people just are not very involved in crypto. Like I'm not talking about the crypto natives who are on here degenning into new farms every day and trying to airdrop farm, whatever. I'm just talking about the casual observer who's heard about this thing on like YouTube or some media site, and they're like, okay, well, this thing seems to be growing. Everyone's talking about it. I'm going to buy it because I want exposure to it. I think that's as far as a lot of people go. And I think that's why you see in like the stock market, for example, like most people aren't going to go in and buy individual stocks. I'm going to buy the index because I haven't got time to look into individual stocks and follow their quarterly reports and everything. Most people don't have time for that. So I think that's why you see such a strong power law in BTC and ETH as well, is because they're the two most well known by far, right? And they have good, obviously, tokenomics to kind of help with that too, I think. And they've been around for a long time, so the network effect is huge. huge. But yeah, I think that's just going to, same thing's going to play out for layer twos. And I think it's already played out for apps as well to an extent. I just like, and it's funny because you can kind of view, these single assets as an index, but in the stock market, it's not just a single asset, right? The S&P 500 is 500 different kind of assets. Whereas in crypto, it's like, oh, ETH is your index for Ethereum. That's one asset. That's a very different mindset there, but people still treat it the same way of like, I'll just buy ETH. I have exposure to Ethereum. Just like I'll buy the S&P 500. I have exposure to America. I think that's the analogy, but it's kind of funny how different it is. Like one asset versus 500, right?
You want to go, Mike?
Yeah, I've actually got a question for Jordi. So Jordi, how would you describe, just as from your seat at an L2 yourself, like how would you describe the business model of layer two? So I'd be really curious to get your answer there.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely think about like other ideas for revenue. Like I said, we ultimately think that, look, first of all, like Mantle has taken a bit of a unique approach where it really collaborates with applications much more less neutrally than like, an Arbitrum where Arbitrum is like a mini Ethereum, right? It's just like trying to recreate the same thing with cheaper gas fees. Mantle's taken an approach of, we're differentiating, we're working very closely with the founders, with the apps, trying to align incentives and like, the entire stack ultimately. So I agree with what you said, like there will be ways to capture value, maybe for some L2s more than other L2s, depending on like the approach they've taken. I think Blast is something that I'm looking at with keen interest. I saw they announced like 17 of the apps, and because they've taken this native yield approach, which is also something that, we've been working very hard on having like very high like yield, you can do some really cool stuff. I don't know if you guys saw the list, but there was something saying like, there's like NFTs that are refundable NFTs where because like there's yield on it, the project can still get the yield. So as long as people are holding it, like I can buy it for 10 ETH and then I can get back 10 ETH whenever I feel like. And then the longer I hold it, the project is just generating yield on the ETH without anyone like losing money, like this kind of stuff. Obviously, like you have to have high yield for it to be meaningful. If it's like 2%, it might not be. But these kind of like creative things is, I love the fact that like, people are experimenting. I love L2s in the sense of like everybody can design their own ecosystem and then we'll see like who actually, it's competition like drives, progress. Who's going to be able to get the killer stuff, the killer applications, best communities. And then, we're all kind of like trying to learn from each other and improve each other. So it makes me very bullish overall, but I think there's going to be like winners and losers in 3 years' time. And, I do think about revenue, and I think sequencer fees are one part of the puzzle. Everyone's very happy to, capture more and more of that for their sequencer. But yeah, there's other sources as well.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.